Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Serene Chua, and I'm your host from the Energy Market Authority of Singapore. Thank you once again for joining us at the SIEW Energy Insights webinar series. Today's webinar, Accelerating Clean Energy Adoption in Asia Through Partnerships and Technology, is held in partnership with Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore, organizer of the SIEW partner event, Asia Clean Energy Summit. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to www.menti.com and enter the code 81580528 to participate in our polls. To pose a question, please use the Q&A feature. Let us know your name and organization, and if your question is directed to a particular speaker. To start today's webinar, I would like to invite Mr. Edwin Kiew, Chairman of the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore, for his opening remarks. Mr. Kiew, please.
Thank you. His Excellency Dr. João Galamba, Deputy Minister and Secretary of State for Energy from the Portuguese Republic, Mr. Ngiam Shichun, Chief Executive, Energy Market Authority, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon to all of you, particularly those in Asia, and good morning to all of you joining us from Europe, and good morning to those who are from the Americas. May I, on behalf of the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore, warmly welcome all visitors and delegates to the Singapore International Week's Energy Insight webinar. In today's session, we have the honor of an esteemed panel, and I, along with all of you, the audience, look forward very much to the presentation and, of course, the panel discussions thereafter. May I just say a few words about SIEW, which is the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore. We were set up some 14 years ago with a large vision of providing a platform for companies in the sustainable energy industry to meet, collaborate, innovate, and embark on projects that not only make good business sense, but also promote the use of cleaner technologies and sustainability. With that in mind, SIEW has embarked on several activities to support the industry with the overarching goal to align our activities with the Singapore Green Plan and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, so that we can, in our small way, contribute to Singapore's net zero ambitions by 2050. One of our flagship activities in SIEW is the Asia Clean Energy Summit, or ACES in short. 8 years ago, SIEW partnered the Solar Energy Research Institute of Singapore, or SERIS, the Energy Research Institute at NTU, or IRIAN, and with the support of the Economic Development Board and the Energy Market Authority, organized the first edition of ACES as part of the Singapore International Energy Week. Taking place live and in person on the 25th to the 26th October 2021, which is just a couple or 3 months away. ACES is the only clean energy focused conference and exhibition within SIEW. ACES convenes ministers, industry CEOs, and leaders of the international organizations. ACES is the region's most important regional platform to share and co-create innovation, clean energy solutions, and sustainable pathways. ACES also powers Singapore ambitions to be the clean energy hub for Asia. The 2021 edition will elevate its international influence via a ministerial dialogue panel, broadening industry participation to include oil and gas, commercial and industry, energy efficiency, and the electric vehicle sector. The conference will be structured to a streamlined program consisting of a strategic conference, including concurrent tracks covering the energy efficiency, solar, and electrical vehicles. SIEW has therefore made great efforts to bring to you, in this year's edition of ACES, a 3-day program comprising business leaders and experts who will share their insights on the advances of digital technology, energy systems for the future, the latest technologies and developments for the clean energy sector, and much more. Our goal is to encourage thought leaders and companies to come together to think of new business models and innovative ideas to build a future world, powered totally by clean energy so that we can reverse and mitigate the effects of climate change. As we all know, climate change or the climate crisis continues to create havoc and disasters in many countries and will worsen if we carry on with business as usual. SIEW, as an industry association, together with all our members, have always been promoting clean energy and sustainability through the use of renewable energy. We have also made concerted efforts and practices of applying energy efficiency to all systems and processes in Singapore, and also many of our members operate within the region. Together with EMA and all our partners, I look forward very much to our continued partnership to ensure a sustainable clean energy future for Singapore and beyond. I wish all a successful webinar and a great afternoon of discussions. Please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Q. It is my pleasure to now invite His Excellency Dr. João Galamba, Deputy Minister and Secretary of State for Energy, Portuguese Republic, to deliver the keynote address. Your Excellency, please.
Good morning. Let me start by thanking Energy Market Authority for the invitation to participate in this webinar and share the Portuguese ambitions when it comes to renewable energy.
I'm talking outside here, I hear your voice.
The challenges our societies face require concerted action between energy and climate policies, since this is the only way possible to achieve a carbon neutral economy and a society that both promotes economic growth and a better quality of life. Portugal's sustainable growth trajectory is funded upon a more competitive and resilient development growth model, reducing the consumption of natural and energetic resources, and at the same time creating new employment opportunities, increasing wealth creation, and foster new knowledge development. This trajectory is anchored on Portugal's National Energy and Climate Plan 2021-2030. This path to a carbon neutral economy requires joint action in several strategic areas, with priority being given to energy efficiency, greater diversification of energy sources, increased electrification, reinforcement and modernization of infrastructures, market stability and investment, reconfiguration and digitalization of the energy markets, and lastly, incentives for research and innovation. This paradigm shift to a new energy consumption model is a fertile ground for the development of new business models, more sustainable, more resilient, and aligned with long-term objectives. Significant volumes of renewable energy deployment are needed to meet climate change targets. Deployment is a consequence, but also a facilitator of decreasing technology costs. Each type of renewable energy technology has its own challenges associated to more widespread deployment. The energy transition is not necessarily a burden for the consumers and the taxpayers. For example, Portugal's 2019 and 20 solar auctions demonstrated the competitiveness of renewable electricity. Both tenders were resounding successes, with Portugal setting world records for the lowest solar tariff price in the world. The more mature technologies, wind and solar PV, paved the way to the energy transition, but they are not the only route within the renewable electricity generation possibilities. Offshore renewable energy production technologies are faster and complementary to traditional solar and wind. Offshore wind systems are emerging technologies that have a very strong potential, and investment costs are declining every year. Some estimates speculate that if we could harness this type of energy, it could supply a considerable part of the world's energy consumption. Wind energy is now and will continue to be one of the main sources of electricity in the future of Portugal. Being onshore wind energy already implemented in practically all locations with good resources, its expansion is foreseen mainly through repowering of of existing parks, and above all through offshore wind, mainly floating technology. In fact, since along the Portuguese coast the continental platform increases in deepness close to the shore, there are few locations along the Portuguese coast to install bottom-fixed offshore wind farms. Floating is therefore the offshore wind technology which is foreseen to have the most widespread use in Portugal. Coastal Portuguese geographical location and the existence of grid infrastructure along the coast allows the future extensive use of this technology. It also should be noted that synergies are growing among different ocean technologies. One of them is the combination of wind and waves in order to produce a more constant profile of energy produced offshore. Furthermore, wave technology generates electricity with a timing profile which is complementary to the wind and solar PV production. Because of that, many countries, even not being coastal, pursue expertise in wave energy. In Portugal, there are several projects running and others in the development phase for these new types of renewable offshore wind production, offshore energy production. If we could have more international partnerships for these innovative research, the chance of success would truly increase. As new challenges emerge, new solutions and opportunities must be found. Regarding the opportunities arising for the necessary energy transition, I must emphasize the role of the hydrogen strategy and share our perspectives to develop an hydrogen industry in Portugal. Encourage the debate around hydrogen and support mechanisms to create a real market for hydrogen and debate associated regulatory conditions. These were some of the priority themes of the Portuguese presidency in the field of energy. The high-level conference on hydrogen, organized under the Portuguese presidency of the European Council, offered a platform to explore hydrogen's current momentum in real-world action. It allowed us to learn more about strategic initiatives based on hydrogen clusters and valleys, exploring new windows of economic, industrial, scientific, and technological opportunities. If we can resume the fundamental aspects of building an hydrogen market in our vision, they are strategy, implementation, financing. Our ambition is a new industrial and technological opportunities matched with new job creation and a strong European market for hydrogen. More than agents acting in an existing market, we need a collective focus and drive to accelerate the creation of markets and the implementation of all the technologies to ensure global industrial and technological opportunities. Hydrogen, particularly green hydrogen, contributes to the pursuit of decarbonization as an energy carrier and for storage, especially on those sectors where electrification is not feasible or simply not cost effective. To achieve its full potential, it is very important to make progress and take the next steps to make its price competitive and create a global market, while maintaining investment in research and innovation to develop the necessary infrastructures and implement measures of certification of origin. It's time to act and move from ideas and plans to execution. That's why Portugal has already carried out several relevant actions in this area. We are promoting an industrial policy around green hydrogen and renewable gases, which is based on the definition of a set of public policies that guide, coordinate, and mobilize public and private investment in projects in the area of production, storage, transport, and consumption of renewable gases. At the national level, we completed the legislative act that frames all these activities. We also approved national hydrogen strategy fully in line with the European strategy, and we also engage in international cooperation around hydrogen to align green hydrogen strategic priorities and to encourage commercial demand international, the creation of an international market where standards and protocols are key. We believe that a small and peripheral country from Southern Europe, like Portugal, can be a key element to push forward the broad use of hydrogen, in particular green hydrogen, in order to better the world's decarbonization goals and contribute to a genuine international hydrogen market. We have the right resources, very competitive conditions, both for solar and wind, and a strategic geographical location that facilitates exports to the main consumption sites. We see port, a deep sea port connected to an industrial park, as a strategic location and a future location for a cluster aiming at securing a synchronized value chain for green hydrogen production, transportation, and demand, focused on leveraging Portugal's renewable energy as a factor of competitiveness with export component. We're working with relevant world economies who want to position themselves as frontrunners in this matter with us to allow the industrial scale-up of green hydrogen. Creating the conditions for long-distance transportation and trade of green hydrogen and green ammonia and green methanol, as well as the financial support mechanisms to kickstart these critical elements of functioning hydrogen economy. We can commit to more ambitious targets, but this requires international cooperation. To finalize, we have to create mechanisms that make it possible to reconcile two objectives. We need to make investments in hydrogen production feasible in the startup phase and promote the beginning of the incorporation of hydrogen in the energy system, while adequately remunerating production, and at the same time avoiding that these objectives represent extra costs for the energy system, which could compromise the consumers' support of this strategy. By aggregating all the relevant stakeholders, by pooling resources to increase scale, and by having a unique collective focus and drive, we believe we can accelerate the implementation of an hydrogen market and ensure global industrial and technological development. The clean energy transition should involve and benefit consumers. This is key. We need consumers on our side to ensure that they are compromised with the strategy. Renewable energy sources will have an essential role in all of this. The smart integration of renewables, energy efficiency, and other sustainable solutions across sectors will help achieve decarbonization at the lowest possible cost. The rapid decrease in the cost of renewables, combined with improved design and support of public policies, will further reduce the impact on households and industries' energy bills regarding renewables deployment. We are pleased to working closely with you on all these matters to reaffirm and reinforce our common ambition and to ensure an energy transition that supports the path to climate neutrality, but it is at the same time an opportunity of economic growth and investment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. If you have not voted, log in to www.menti.com and enter 81580528 to participate. Let us now invite Mr. Dolph Gillen, Director, Innovation and Technology Center, International Renewable Energy Agency, for his presentation on the IRENA World Energy Transitions Outlook 2021. Mr. Gillen, please.
Thank you very much, Serene, and thank you for having me today. I would like to present our perspective on how the world can decarbonize. It's something we published in March of this year. So it's the first time that IRENA published a 1.5 degree pathway, and in June, we also published a detailed assessment of the socioeconomic impacts of such transition. And you can find them on our website. So if you move to the next slide, in Paris in 2015, the world agreed to an objective of well below 2 degrees scenario. And the world has changed since. Turns out that the climate impacts are much more severe than anticipated, and there is a need to aim for maximum of 1.5 degree climate change. And more countries have signed up to this. About 70% of world emissions are taking place in countries that have signed up to net zero emissions by 2050. The question, of course, is how to put such objectives into practice. And 1.5 degrees is fundamentally different than 2 degrees because it means that you not only need to focus on decarbonizing the power sector, but we also need to decarbonize the end-use sectors, so buildings, industry, and transport. And that is why we developed this 1.5 degree pathway. Our conclusions, big picture, are in line with many other leading scenarios. So there is a consensus that what we need is, on the supply side, much more renewables. At the same time, we need to electrify end-use sectors, notably transportation. And we need to work on the efficiency of energy use. So these three pillars combined account for about 70% of the global decarbonization. And then on top of that, there is the use of hydrogen, and there is CO2 capture and storage. So for the coming decade, what needs to happen is that we focus especially on introduction of renewables in power generation and on the phase out of coal-based power generation, which is of course very relevant also in an ASEAN context. And we need to ramp up all these clean technologies significantly. We need a ramp up, it depends on which indicator you use, somewhere between a factor 3 and even a factor 8. So in the coming decade, this decade to 2030 is really critical to make this transition happen. There is a strong economic case for this transition. So we calculated that the benefits exceed the costs by a factor of 2 to nearly 6. So the question is, how do we create the enabling frameworks? Minister Galamba also just talked about to get that acceleration going. So if you move to the next slide. So this illustrates where we are heading with policies in place and what we need. So we need that these objectives, which have been formulated, that they are translated into policies and into laws, so that they become compulsory. And of course, we need a global effort to make this happen. So in that sense, the coming COP26 is really critical to translate these objectives into concrete plans. And the implication is decarbonization of all sectors worldwide, and with for the period to 2030, and a special effort in power generation. Now, if you move to the next slide, the conditions to make that happen have significantly improved in recent years because of innovation. So, and the cost reduction we see for example, renewable power generation has been very significant. So our latest cost assessment issued in June showed that in 2020, global average cost for onshore wind were about 3.9 cents per kilowatt hour, for solar PV about 5.7 cents per kilowatt hour. And the costs in the ASEAN region are very much in line with these global averages. And costs continue to fall. So we've come to a situation where renewables have become the cheapest form of power generation. And that is driving the global uptake. And you see that also increasingly in the ASEAN region. We see similar cost reductions also in other sectors. And of course, the sector which is receiving most attention and where you see most action at the moment is electromobility, very much driven by the significant cost reduction for the batteries. But we see similar positive developments also now in other sectors. And that is very much helping this energy transition. So if you move to the next slide, that illustrates what we have seen in renewable power generation. So already for some years, renewables dominate the total global capacity additions. According to our statistics, last year, around 264 gigawatts of renewable capacity were added. So despite the COVID crisis, a new record in renewable capacity additions. We expect further growth in this year and in years to come. And that is having its effect on the global power mix. So last year, roughly 30% renewables in global power generation, also a new record there. And that percentage will continue to increase rapidly. But even if last year was a record, we're not yet at the levels that are needed. We need, in fact, a threefold increase in this decade to reach the speed of energy transition that we need. We move to the next slide, because we need to grow to power systems worldwide that are dominated by solar and by wind. We think that we need about 8,000 gigawatts of wind and about 15,000 gigawatts of solar PV by 2050. And so today, both types of technologies are below 1,000 gigawatts installed capacity. So very significant ramp up is needed worldwide. And we go to power systems that are dominated by these variable renewables. So we see that about nearly two-thirds of electricity generation 2050 will be from solar and wind. And of course, that has big implications on how you operate such power systems. It will be very different from today. We move to the next slide. What we need is a much higher level of what is called flexibility. So flexibility means that supply must meet demand at all times. And also, we should try to minimize the curtailment of any of these renewables, because of course there is a cost involved with that. We have 4 ways to enhance that flexibility. Of course, enabling technologies such as batteries, such as production of green hydrogen. But what is perhaps more important is also adjustments in market design. So we need prices that reflect scarcity in time and in space. We need to have another close look at systems operation, because power lines are today in many jurisdictions not yet used in the best way to accommodate these renewables. And we need to also allow for new business models, such as aggregators that use the distributed energy resources, such as rooftop PV and behind-the-meter batteries, and also to allow for peer-to-peer electricity trading. So if you combine these 4 dimensions, you can find new solutions that will allow integration of much higher shares of variable renewables. And from the front-runner countries, you can already see that it is possible to move to much higher shares. Now, I wanted to give 2 examples that are specifically relevant in an end-use context, also for Singapore. One is shipping and one is aviation. If you move to the next slide. So shipping is also an important sector. Today, heavy fuel oil is used. Singapore is a major bunkering station for these ships. And Irene is also part of the Getting to Zero Coalition for Shipping, where we discuss solutions. And green ammonia and also renewable methanol have emerged as important solutions for the shipping sector. At the moment, the first ships are being put into practice. In fact, there are about 20 ships already running on methanol around the world. Ammonia is currently being introduced as a shipping fuel, and there's a lot of activity, around 35, 40 projects on green ammonia production around the world. Costs are coming down, and we expect we will see a major shift in introduction of these clean shipping fuels in the coming decade. And it's important also on the harbor side, on the supply side, to start planning for this transition because it has implications also for the bunkering infrastructure. Aviation, the next slide, a similar picture, but I would say it's a little bit lagging compared to what we see in shipping. So there are two major solutions there on the supply side. One is synthetic aviation fuels, some activity in producing these using green hydrogen, but also biojet as a major solution. So we issued a new report on biojet last month. Today, the volumes are still modest, around 140 million liters of biojet. What we need is a very significant increase, a thousandfold increase, in fact, to 100 to 200 billion liters of biojet. Today, the use of vegetable oils and used cooking oils is the major source of these biojet fuels. We need to go to more advanced biofuels produced from biomass residues. We think that there is an increasingly an economic case, but there is still a long way to go, and there's much more effort needed in make this transition happen. So we also need the enabling frameworks to make that happen. Minister Galamba mentioned offshore renewables. We issued a report on that for the G20, was also released last month. And we see interesting opportunities there for offshore wind, but also increasingly for marine technologies. So that's also relevant in an ASEAN context, with Indonesia having the G20 presidency next year. So we look forward to that cooperation. And of course, we need to work on also regional and national roadmaps, because these global numbers are nice, but in fact, the implementation needs to take place at the national level. We're working with ASEAN, with Indonesia and with Malaysia at the moment to develop such roadmaps, and we look forward to a further strengthened discussion in the coming months as we produce the results from that. Finally, in hydrogen, our collaborative framework where it focuses on that, and standards and certification is a key focus area there, with geopolitics also receiving a lot of attention right now, and future trade. I'll stop there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Gillen. If you have not voted, log in to www.menti.com and enter 81580528 to participate. Let us now take a look at the results of our poll questions. So for the first question on accelerating clean energy, it seems like most of our respondents agree strongly with the statements that has been displayed. Can we have the result for the poll number 2, please? So for this, more robust policy frameworks has been ranked first. And could we have the result for the last poll, please? We see quite a fair bit of statements being shown here. Do keep your answers coming. As we begin the discussion, please use the Q&A feature to pose your questions. Let us know your name and organization, and if your question is directed to a particular speaker. It is my pleasure to now invite His Excellency, Mr. Gillen, Mr. Binau Yuan, Head of Department, Renewables, APAC, Energy System, DNV, Mr. Brendan McGordon, Regional Manager for Asia, US Trade and Development Agency, Mr. Jie Tang, Practice Manager for the Energy and Extractive Global Practice, World Bank Group, to join our moderator, Mr. Justin Wu, Head of Asia Pacific, Bloomberg NEF, for the panel discussion. I'll now hand over to Mr. Wu. Mr. Wu, please.
Thank you very much, Serene, for the introduction. And also I want to thank Minister Galamba and Mr. Gillen for their very insightful opening remarks, and also presentation to set the scene. So over the next 45 or 50 minutes or so, we're going to have a panel discussion about how to accelerate clean energy adoption in Asia, and also specifically also in Southeast Asia, the region that we're, I think, is the focus of this webinar. So I noticed actually from the poll remarks that there were an interesting variety of comments about the state of renewable energy or clean energy development deployment in Asia. What's interesting is actually, I think a lot of people may still not be aware that actually Asia has been the epicenter of clean energy deployment for the past 10 years. A lot of it actually has taken place in China and some in India, but not so much in actually Southeast Asia until very recently. So just to give you a little bit of context from some data that we gathered in 2020, so this was during the pandemic, about $19.4 billion of renewable energy investment was made in Southeast Asia. 71% of that was in Vietnam. So what is the context of $19.4 billion? It's actually about 5 times as much as it was in 2019, which was $4.2 billion. So obviously, as you can see, that renewable energy investment has been accelerating in Southeast Asia and has been growing. But as the ARENA presentation pointed out, the first pillar of achieving no more than 1.5 degrees of global warming by 2050 is to ensure that actually in the next 10 years, we deploy a lot more renewable energy. So I think there's a big question about how do we accelerate this in the next 10 years. So I want this panel actually to focus a little bit about probably the near term, the next 10 years, and specifically what we can do in Southeast Asia. So I want to start with Dr. Galamba, Minister Galamba. I don't think we may not need actually an introduction for you, but actually I'm curious to hear from your perspective or from the Portuguese government's perspective, what are your main interests or any activities that you have so far in Southeast Asia with regards to renewable energy?
As I mentioned in my speech, we believe that a collaborative approach is key. There is a lot going on in Europe, and Europe has the right policy tools to ensure the acceleration of investments. But we believe that to move one step forward, and the perfect example is green hydrogen and all the required standards that need to be put in place for the market to exist, then we need to go well beyond Europe. Singapore, for example. Yes.
Sorry, Dr. Galamba, can you still hear us?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, please continue.
I'm in a small village in Portugal, and the connection is not the best.
Yes, please continue. We can hear you. Yeah.
Yes. I believe, for example, that the priority that we give to ports makes total sense when we look at East Asia. For example, the concession of our main goods port in the south of Portugal is Singapore Port Authority. And we believe that the international partnerships around ports, around standards, are key to move even further and to accelerate even further the required investments needed. We won't go anywhere if we look just at the European space, our traditional European partners. We need to go beyond that. And I think this international dimension of collaboration sets the correct stage for the acceleration needed in global efforts to achieve the desired goals.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think international cooperation is very important, and I think a topic of great interest amongst this audience. So maybe we'll return to that in a moment. Mr. Galen, I want to come to you. So I always great to see a presentation from ARENA and the views and the thinking that you're presenting. If I may ask you, do you have any thoughts about Southeast Asia or ASEAN in particular, about where you see the state of things are, and whether what are some things that you like to see happen in terms of accelerating clean energy deployment within this region in the next 10 years?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, As you also said yourself, it's very encouraging to see the rapid acceleration of uptake of renewables in the region. And the numbers for Vietnam are particularly remarkable, I would say. To go from 0 to about 25% solar PV in the generation mix in 3 years is remarkable, to say the least. But of course, there have been important efforts also in other countries, in Thailand, in Singapore, in Malaysia, etc. And the uptake of especially solar PV poses a great opportunity in the region, and you see that is currently accelerating. The uptake of offshore wind is accelerating. And of course, the region has also significant hydropower resources still left to be developed. There is geothermal. There is a significant bioenergy potential. Of course, we have to consider sustainability also there as an important aspect, but potential is very significant. So developing all these aspects further in the coming years will be important, with initially especially a focus on the power sector.
Thank you very much, Mr. Galen, for that. Let me turn to Brandon next. If you could briefly introduce yourself and also tell us a little bit about your organization and your interests and activities in Southeast Asia.
Great. Well, thank you, Justin, and also thanks to our organizers in Singapore for including USTDA in this great program. As mentioned, I'm Brandon McGordon. I'm the regional manager for the U.S. Trade and Development Agency based in Bangkok. I support USTDA's business development across our different sector portfolios in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. USTDA, for those who are not familiar with our agency, we primarily serve as a project preparation facility to support early stage infrastructure development in emerging markets. So our agency provides grant funding for project development activities such as feasibility studies, master plans, technical assistance, engineering and design, and pilot projects. These tools help our partners here in the region to accelerate and to de-risk projects through these early stages of development, from anywhere from concept to the point of financing and implementation. Our agency, we're an on-demand project preparation facility, so the private sector developers, government, state-owned enterprise, the participants on this phone are welcome to reach out to USTDA at any time to approach us with new proposals for clean energy projects to support decarbonization goals in the region. As reference, in this region, we've done over the past two decades have supported more than 250 energy infrastructure projects, and it makes up about a third of our ongoing program work in the region. So again, that includes projects such as early stage support for power generation, transmission and distribution, energy efficiency, as well as digitalization of the power sector. Since I know we don't have slides, if folks on the call would like to learn more about our tools, you can find out more on our website, ustda.gov. Over to you, Justin.
Thank you very much, Brandon, for the introduction. Let me turn to Mr. Binau Nguyen next. Binau, can you give us a quick introduction and also tell us a little bit about your organization, your activities and interests in the region?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the introduction. So my name is Binau Nguyen. I'm the head of Renewables APAC for DNV. And DNV is one of the largest classification society in the maritime sector. And we also are one of the largest technical consultancy and supervisory in the renewable space. So my department, we are providing owners engineering services or technical due diligence services for offshore wind, onshore wind, and also solar PV. We've seen a lot of interesting floating PV projects also coming up. And we are also supporting storage project or hybrid projects in the region. So we are taking more the angle of a technical advisor side.
Thank you very much, Binau. Thank you. And last but not least, I'd like to invite Mr. Jie Tang. Can you please introduce yourself and also tell us a little bit about the World Bank's or your department within the World Bank's interests and activities in the region?
Okay, thank you, Justin. Thank you for the invitation to this forum. My name is Jie Tang. I'm the practice manager for energy and the extractive global practice of the World Bank, in charge of all the World Bank energy business in East Asia and the Pacific region, covering about 26 countries. So our major energy program, working closely with the government, is really looking at the energy development in the future, right? Not only on the renewable energy side, but overall on the carbon emission reductions in the energy sector. So often we are talking about the renewable energy development, but on the other side, how you also deal with the coal phasing out is critical. While you are talking about, the fast-growing renewable energy in China, in Vietnam, in Philippines, in Indonesia, perhaps the coal power capacity is going even faster. So this is a challenge that we're facing, and we're working closely with the government, not only on the renewable energy side, but for the energy as a whole, how to slow down the coal in the region. And the priority for World Bank engagement is to really stabilize and bend the curve and try to bring the energy sector into a sustainable approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tang. Okay, so I think for the next part, I'll, based on your introductions and some of the things you said, maybe I'll ask each of you individually some more specific questions on your interests and activities, and hopefully this will be very useful for the audience and help them understand a little bit the expertise that you're bringing to this area. So Minister Galamba, maybe coming back to you again. You mentioned in your opening remarks some really interesting examples of what Portugal is doing with regards to the low carbon energy transition, a lot of new technologies and things like that. If I may ask you just to say a few more words about what you think are some lessons from Portugal's experience that you think may be relevant for Asia with regards to whether renewable energy deployment or some of the newer technologies you mentioned, such as floating offshore wind or hydrogen. Are there some lessons you think from Portugal's experience that might be relevant for Asia?
Well, I think the first aspect that I think was key to the development of these sorts of policies in Europe is mandating goals, mandatory goals for emission reductions, for the penetration of renewables in different sectors, are important drivers in coordination and setting the tone for then private investment to follow. So one of the main policy areas that I think works, it worked in Europe and it definitely worked in Portugal, is this idea that you need to set goals, demanding goals over 10 years. So we have the goals for 2030, and we see them as drivers of private investment and sending a strong political signal that commits the country towards those goals. So that's the first lesson. And the second lesson is that we need to make the energy transition work for families and industry. So paying close attention to the cost element of all of this is key. In the beginning, in 2005, when we started a strong push for renewables, mainly in the wind sector, we had feed-in tariffs that went into the electricity tariff, and this created a certain backlash in companies and families because they started seeing renewables as a synonym with extra costs. That should be avoided as much as you can. So, for example, the cost of support mechanisms should be outside of power tariffs and outside as much as we can outside of the cost structure, and should be paid by other ways or by the national budget. But we should minimize the costs that go to families and industry, because we really need the energy transition to be a happy story. Let's call it like this. And if we are at this is completely true in Portugal. Renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy, especially wind and solar in Portugal. It makes that story easier, but that's a concern that I think all countries that are committed to decarbonizing their economy need to pay close attention. Firm targets in different areas: transportation, heavy industry, the power sector. For example, we are introducing goals for shipping and air travel to signal exactly this commitment that we also want to decarbonize those areas. So these are the two main issues that I wanted to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Yeah, I think those are really relevant remarks, actually, and lessons. And I think something that, yeah, something I think very relevant for Asia as well, in the context of economic development, as well as sort of, you know, how government will go about supporting renewable energy. I think actually this is a good segue for my next question for Mr. Galen. I actually wanted to ask you about policy. So you mentioned in your presentation that that's one of the important pillars for accelerating deployment in renewable energy in the next 10 years. Can you maybe elaborate down a little bit? We actually have, you know, I took a look at the participant list. We actually have a fair number of policymakers from around the ASEAN region on this webinar. So are there things you think that they should look at, or you think policy is going to be the main driver, or there's something else in addition to that?
Well, policy, of course, is very important as an enabler. The fossil fuel subsidies still play an important role in the region. So that is probably one of the aspects that immediately deserves some attention and where there are some quick wins. The question is also, should CO2 be priced? That is another aspect that can play an important role, especially in the context of coal investments. And what is important there is not only, let's say, a long-term goal for transition, but practical incentives to create the business case and to create a confidence that there will be enabling frameworks in place for several decades, because any investment in the power sector is a long-term investment. But there is other aspects, for example, the enabling infrastructure is very important. Southeast Asia, there has been quite a lot of discussion around interconnectors, how to enhance the power systems integration, which is one of the enabling factors for introducing more renewables. Still more can be done in that context. And then this new attention now also for the end-use sectors, with electromobility being clearly the first one. And again, there is an important role for governments in creating that enabling infrastructures. In this case, the charging infrastructure for these electric vehicles, and to ensure that they also contribute to this power systems flexibility. So we need smart charging going forward. So all these aspects have a private sector investment component, but also a very important public sector component and infrastructure component where governments have to play.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Gillen, for your remarks. I'm going to jump around a little bit, actually, and come to Mr. Tang, actually, for the next question. So actually, there's quite a few questions in the chat box. So I want to thank the audience for putting them in, and I'm trying to read them and weave your views into my questions for the panelists as well. So do please continue putting that forward. So Mr. Tang, you actually mentioned in your opening remarks about coal, that even though we've seen a rapid deployment of renewable energy in ASEAN, coal is still, well, there's still a lot of coal power being built. And whether correctly or incorrectly, there's still a perception in the region that coal power is needed given the rapid development of power demand in the region. There's some comments from the audience saying that essentially most Southeast Asian countries still believe that it needs to rely on its region's natural resources. So what, can you tell us a little bit more about your view on that? What do you think, what is your view on that? And also, you mentioned sort of phasing out coal in the region. How can that be achieved?
Yes, first, the 4 Asian countries that under my coverage, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, consumes 58% of the world coal consumption. China alone, 52% more than the rest of the world, right? Around, on average, 70% was used for power generation. So that's a reality we're facing. So if you look at the next 5 to 10 years, we are working with the government on their national planning on the energy sector. So we see that government are trying to make a lot of efforts to slow down adding additional coal power, but still in all these 4 countries, we see that they will continue to add coal power in the next 5 years. So particularly in Indonesia and Philippines and Vietnam, the coal power capacity addition is huge, but maybe slower than what we say over the past, given the climate change commitment of the government. The major reason that first is still the energy security. When we talk about the renewable energy, solar and wind, the intermittence, right, is still an issue unless you really have a very strong, robust system, as well as storage capacity, like a battery storage or pump storage. Then this supply, the base node and the peak node cannot fully rely on, solar and wind. So that's why first, faster growing of technology on storage system, right? And also lower than the cost is critical on the future, path for renewable energy development. When you have a small amount of renewable energy, it does not matter. But when you come to the certain size, like China, right? So far they have installed around 540 gigawatt of solar and wind. In 2000 alone, last year alone, they added 120 gigawatt into the system. But still, curtailment, intermittency is a big challenge. And for heating supplies, they still need to build more CHP and combined heat and power, coal power plant and to meet that. So that's the first part is a technical one. And the second is really, there's a huge vested interest behind the coal value chain, right? From the coal production, transportation, import and export, and the coal power generation. There is a huge investment already invested in the sector. So phasing them out will result in stranded assets, but does the government are ready to managing the macroeconomic impacts as well as social impacts associated with phasing out coal, right? The answer is perhaps is not, right? We see that China has started, testing on coal mine closure, phasing out the old coal power plant. They have closed last year in one province in Shanxi, more than 100 small coal mines. But the associated social impact is huge, and they are struggling on how to deal with the employment and social impacts. I think a third is really, we see that in the whole Asia country, where the major coal consumption is coming for the world, right? We see the energy transition will go through 3 stages. First is really to slow down the coal growth. Second is to stabilize. And the third is ready to decline. And so far, based on the national planning, the investment program that we're looking at the country level, right? China perhaps is, moving to the second stage, stabilizing coal consumption. But Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, who are the coal major consumption country, right, are still in the growing phase due to the stranded assets currently going on and the continued investment in the future, and also the energy security demand, as well as the renewable energy development pace could not catch up really with the load growth, and also the storage and the intermittency issue. And finally, we see that even for the current NDC commitment of those countries, which is not consistent with a 2 degree or 1.5 degree, right? It will be more than that, right? Still, we need around $11 trillion investment in the next 10 years for just for these 4 countries. So there's a huge financial resources needed. That would result in the cost of electricity going up between 10 to 20% in those countries. So those impacts that the government is facing, they are waiting for international support on concessional financing. So as a World Bank, as an international financing institution, one of the things we are struggling is really how do we really mobilize international concessional financing to support those countries so that they can go a more aggressive, path on decarbonizing the energy sector. So these are the challenges that we are facing. And I say policy and the regulation is critical. Bring private sector participation is also critical. But concessional financing, international support will help accelerating the decarbonization in those countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kang. Yeah, I think this, yeah, again, I think we might want to return to this question about partnerships and international cooperation. Turning to Binau, maybe I'll bring you into the conversation. Actually, I was going to let you, I'll let you comment on actually any of the last three questions I asked, but maybe throw in another one. So whether it's the policy question I asked Mr. Galen earlier about, what that means for Southeast Asia. Also, if you have any views on sort of fossil fuels and moving away from that. But maybe one closer to the work of DNV is also on opportunities in renewable energy that you see in the region. So feel free to approach any of the three angles. Maybe starting the opportunities one. Are there any technologies or opportunities you see in the region that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, maybe I can start. There are great resources Southeast Asia. We see there's a lot of sun. There is wind in some part of Southeast Asia as well. I'm thinking Vietnam in particular, Philippines, Indonesia. So onshore wind, offshore wind can be relevant in these places. There's great geothermal resource in Indonesia, a lot of hydro in Vietnam. So countries are quite rich in renewables. Now the renewables are not the silver bullet, and as Mr. Jietong said, it's not dispatchable. So as the penetration increase, you need to go together with different solutions. We see the storage, so lithium-ion batteries, also flow batteries. We provide meaningful solution now, storing about up to 4 hours. With when I look at storage solar, cost around 7-10 cents per kilowatt hour. So this starts to get not the price you really want as a large scale, but it starts to get competitive with the other sources. What I want to make it clear is this 1.5 future is very difficult. It's a very challenging target. We already emit about 2,500 billion tons of CO2, and we are adding another 50 every year. If we stop everything now, we are still already on a 1.5 degree path sometime next decade to 2 decades. The big challenge is how can we just reduce our emission as fast as possible to not go beyond that. And a future at 2-3 degrees, is a risk that the climate will spin out of control. So do we want to take this experiment or not? I think now we still have time to do something. But when we see other forecasts like IEA, they are very clear we should stop all exploitation of gas fields, no more coal mines. We should phase out all coal-fired plants, also the gas-fired plant. The gas-fired plant haven't been discussed yet, but they are shown as one of the ways to balance the intermittency of renewables as well in the coming decades. It's really going to be up to the governments to decide if they want to use that as a tool to increase the renewable share in their system. But on the positive side, I see, for example, the pickup of EVs will bring a lot of batteries inside the system. With more intelligent system and balancing the demand, it's possible to increase the share of renewables inside the whole system. So I would say technical solutions are there. Maybe the price is not the best at the moment, but if we have commitment for governments to have long-term policies and regulations for this long-term investment, we can find a path to zero emission by 2050. But this is really very challenging. And the system we see in Southeast Asia also is more traditional. There is generation coal-fired plant or just thermal power plants producing to the distribution centers. So the grid is not also designed to have many small generation out there. So grid infrastructure investment will be required and needs also more flexibility. So at the moment, in a lot of markets, the producer of power, they are the main off-takers. And you don't allow private off-takers in these markets. You can't have corporate PPAs. So this is also something that needs to be solved if you want to see a much bigger uptake of renewables.
Thank you for that. Brandon, let me come back to you. You know, I think from amongst the participants on this webinar, there's a lot of interest on partnerships and support. And you mentioned that the USTDA, you know, you've been running a lot of programs to support early technologies and other things. Can you tell us maybe a little more about that, or give us an example of a project or program that you've supported?
Sure. Thank you, Justin. As mentioned, again, we operate as an on-demand project preparation facility. So we get requests at any time of the year from the private sector, from governments, from state-owned enterprise. And USTDA support is again being used to help with that early stage feasibility, technical assistance, piloting, and engineering of technologies. So we really do respond or develop and program our projects in response to the project requests and demands from across the region. I think in particular, in addition to the larger scale solar and wind projects, both on and offshore, I think we really also see increasing requests for things such as distributed power generation. So looking at renewable mini grids in places like Philippines and Indonesia, hybrid power systems, integration of energy storage in new markets. For example, we're working with a Thai developer, a Thai energy developer here in Thailand to look at integrating energy storage with their utility scale solar project as an example of a USTDA grant activity. Also, everyone on the panel, I think, has already mentioned electric vehicle is a major trend and an increasing area of requests that we're seeing. So we're actually currently working with another Thai industry partner on a decarbonization and EV strategy. So again, looking at the business case, the infrastructure requirements, cost and financing requirements for that Thai private sector partner to transition their vehicle fleet to an EV platform. So just a few examples, and even at the requests at the smart city and industrial park level of looking at integrating smart solutions, energy efficiency, as well as demand side management type technologies to really help integrate some new technologies. We're getting requests really from across those areas. So I think just to mention as well, another opportunity that we see really is the emergence of other project preparation facilities. So as I mentioned, again, facilities that are really focused at this early stage of project development. We see an emergence of over the past couple of years of new facilities and playing in this space. I think this is a really exciting opportunity because it not only is there growing demand for these types of projects, but we see new tools and resources. And I think it provides new opportunities for us to blend some of these resources from different partners to support these projects. I think in particular where we see larger scale projects like larger scale wind and geothermal projects that have a lot of risk and upfront costs, our blended tools can really make a difference in that early stage development.
Thank you, Brandon, for that. Just looking at the question and answer box, there's been quite a few questions revolving around hydrogen. So maybe I feel like we can't sort of have a energy panel these days without addressing this topic. So Minister Galamba, if I come back to you. You mentioned in your opening remarks about sort of Portugal and also the EU's hydrogen strategy and roadmap. And I think, safe to say around the world, a lot of people are looking at what the EU and countries in the EU like Portugal are doing with regards to hydrogen. So can you tell us a little more about that? What are some specific things that you're focusing on? And, again, perhaps what are some of the relevance of that for countries in Asia?
Yes, we adopted quite early a national hydrogen strategy, and we immediately changed our entire the gas law to adapt it to renewable gases and to include all matters pertaining to hydrogen. So all the areas pertaining to production, to distribution, and to consumption, we completed, revised our legal framework immediately to make sure that we had that in place. And then, because we recognize that is, like I said, this is not a set of agents acting in a market, but a set of agents trying to create a market, which is something conceptually quite different. So if collaboration between state authorities and private entities is key in all areas, in hydrogen is crucial. So what we are trying to do at the moment is to tackle simultaneously supply and demand. So we have CapEx support mechanisms for supply, traditional with European funds, and as we've always had in all areas of investment. The novelty here is that we are setting up demand support mechanisms simultaneously with the supply support mechanism, and these will support OPEX, because a significant part of the challenge that needs to be tackled is not so much the cost of investment, but the operational costs that need to come down. So we are setting up these two support mechanisms. So the CapEx support mechanism grew considerably with the Recovery and Resilience Program, where we are mobilizing a significant amount of European funds to support hydrogen. But at the same time, we're basically using the revenues coming out of the ETS system. So the polluting industries in Portugal will recycle those revenues to support those same industries in their fuel switching from natural gas or other fossil source to hydrogen or hydrogen-related products like ammonia and methanol. So I think the challenge is to tackle these two sides simultaneously. You need to tackle supply and demand at the same time and to integrate them as much as we can. Regarding integration, we believe that in the initial stage, there are many projects close or around ports. So there's already a geographical proximity between supply and demand. This facilitates this coordination effort that we are putting in place to tackle simultaneously supply and demand. This is the way that we believe that with the right legal framework, with a certain cluster approach to these projects where production and usage are close by, and then with the support mechanisms that tackle simultaneously supply and demand, we think we have the right policy tools to have this kickstarted. And we already have projects in Portugal, we already are supporting projects, and we will support more. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Galen, do you have anything to add about hydrogen, or actually maybe I should say, what do you think people in the region, in ASEAN, how should they think about this opportunity? Because as you say, in the arena presentation and many other sort of forecasts, there's an evolving consensus around hydrogen having to play a role in decarbonization. So how should people in the region think about it right now?
We see indeed an important role for hydrogen in this energy transition. We're a little bit still not convinced that you will see massive transport of liquid hydrogen around the world going forward. So we see a strong case for green ammonia. And that, of course, the primary application will be green ammonia for those applications where we use ammonia today, so for fertilizer production. A little bit further out, then also for shipping. Trade in ammonia is likely to increase significantly, and of course that can also play a role in the region. Then there is also a number of other commodities, such as I mentioned methanol, but there's maybe also direct reduced iron, which can play an increasingly important role as a traded commodity. So commodity trade will change. And then let's see what's going to happen with pipelines. So in Europe, there's a lot of attention for retooling of existing natural gas pipelines for the use of hydrogen. You need to replace compressors, you need to replace flanges if you do that, but most of these pipelines are suited also for hydrogen transportation with limited adjustments. And that can, of course, also longer term play a role in the region.
Thank you for that. Mr. Tang, actually, let me come to you. Maybe you can take a stab at this question, but there's one from the audience regarding views on blue versus green hydrogen, and also whether there's a role for blue hydrogen in the energy transition. I think blue hydrogen, for those who don't know, is commonly referred to as hydrogen generated by fossil fuels with carbon capture. So, Mr. Tong, do you have a view on this, or would you like to comment?
Maybe not exactly, talking from the World Bank side, what we are working with the government in Asia right now is really look at, how to decarbonize the transport sector. And we see hydrogen will play a critical role. Like a gas will play a transition role also in the power sector, right? Replacing coal. Regarding hydrogen, currently the World Bank is working with China and also in Vietnam and looking for how, even in now PDR, looking for how to use surplus renewable energy to produce green hydrogen. And in the World Bank, as in the infrastructure department, we also have transport in our department. So we are carry out analytical work on studying how hydrogen will help a decarbonization of the transport sector together with our transport colleagues, looking at not only heavy trucks, but also shipping industries, right? Then currently this is going on. So we are also talking with the government on how to make a policy institution and recognition available to encourage investment in green hydrogen production. And so far, the World Bank, we do not touch, investing in coal or investing in fossil fuel, except gas as a transition for power. So that's current work we're going on, still in the early stage, as we say that it's not commercially viable at this stage, but the early engagement together with the government, looking at the business model, the cost, and then the technology is what we're doing right now.
Thank you very much. Benoit or Brandon, would either of you like to also comment on hydrogen, or you have a perspective on it?
Well, there've been a discussion of sourcing hydrogen from different ways. So the green hydrogen, going from electrolysis, and they can balance the viability of renewables. And so that's why it's seen as a very great solution. And there are different ways of integrating hydrogen in the economy. So transport is one, but industries in general may make use of this hydrogen, and that can be used as well as a source of heat. So for European countries, I think they consider that as a future fuel for heating. The other kind of hydrogen, they discuss the gray hydrogen, which is generated from the electricity from the grid directly. So that would come from like the different mix you have in this specific grid. And the blue one is using the chemical reaction from methane, so coming from fossil fuels. And I don't think the plan is to associate it with CCUS. So this type of technology will allow to create more hydrogen and develop the downstream, but that will generate more CO2 emissions. So actually, that's not really like a very good permanent solution. And I think, it's looked at because it's bringing more flexibility in the system. But I think we are like at least a decade away from really having like commercial hydrogen solutions. And one of the challenges, for example, I can mention is the hydrolysis doesn't work currently if you don't have a constant high load. So actually you can't really have it like flexible, taking the variability of the renewable, generate just on and off. So I think this creates some challenges. Really have a meaningful commercial solution for the moment, but I think we'll need a lot of research and a lot of technological breakthrough as well in the coming decade to make all this into a future.
Thank you. Brandon, I'm not sure if US TDA does any hydrogen projects, but is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add again, we can help countries or private sector look at evaluating different technologies and infrastructure requirements as part of that decarbonization strategy. So again, I'm open to looking at different types of feasibility or technical assistance support for that type of infrastructure.
Actually, Brandon, maybe a follow-up question. And is there a type of size of project or a sweet spot that you would be looking for?
So really, we really work across the energy space. So when it comes to power generation, transmission and distribution, Also looking at things like energy efficiency, as well as increasingly on the digitalization of especially of the grid and infrastructure, or even looking at say digital power plants. As far as projects, again, we're looking at major infrastructure projects, but really we have a pretty flexible program. So we're happy to look at a range of different energy project types. I think in particular, we're really looking to support a wide range and diversity of energy business models and technology types to really scale up and support those, especially from an early stage.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We have just actually under 10 minutes left, so we're running low on time. So maybe what I'll do for the next segment is to look at some of the audience questions and then address it to the panel. Some are actually maybe specific for each of you, and others we'll just open it to anybody who wants to answer. So Mr. Galen, I think there is one question for you actually specifically about the 4.4 trillion US dollars of investment in energy. I think people want a bit of a clarification on whether that's towards renewables or towards, what encompasses that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. And in fact, it's a good question, because there's a lot of confusion about these numbers. So power generation, renewable power generation is included. The flexibility investments are included. Say recharging infrastructure is included, but for example, the cost of electric vehicles is not included, because the assumption is that the cost will drop to the same level or a lower level than of vehicles with internal combustion engines. If you would include that cost is much higher. Or the investment volume. In fact, it's not a cost, because the cost is even lower than for internal combustion. There was a specific question, well, is for example, the cost of copper mining included? So the cost of copper is included when we talk about the total cost of the transition, but we've not included the cost of new copper mines into this investment number. We're just looking now into the critical materials needs and what that means in investment needs. It's not that significant, but in this specific analysis, it was not yet.
Okay, thank you very much for clarifying that. There's another question, actually, it's kind of an interesting one on the impact of the EU, what's being discussed, the European Union's carbon border adjustment tax and its potential potential impact on Southeast Asia and trade. Minister Galamba, feel free to comment on that, or others as well. Is there, any view you might have on that? And we may have lost the minister temporarily. Anyone else want to maybe comment on that question, or we could maybe move on to a different one. Okay, why don't we hold that and maybe move on to a different one. There's another, well, given I think this is a virtual webinar, but I think our organizers and a fair bit of the audience actually comes from Singapore. So I think there has always been a broader question about the role of Singapore in the energy transition, whether it can be a hub for renewable energy production, or or rather, what options does it have? Does anybody want to sort of take a stab at that question? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes, I just wanted to comment that there is a limited of space in Singapore, so you can't really have a generation hub in Singapore. There are already initiatives to have solar PV on the different buildings in the city. There are some of the freshwater reservoirs which are used for floating PV as well. I heard the ambition to maybe actually build the projects outside Singapore, for example, in Malaysia or in Batam, and then have the power transferred into Singapore. But I I think it's a bit of a challenge to have a country like creating its own renewable power due to scarcity of land.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Binau, for addressing the question. Mr. Galamba, welcome back, and maybe we'll give you the final. No worries. We'll give you the final comment. So there's a question about the EU's carbon border adjustment tax and its, impact on Southeast Asia. Do you have any thoughts about that? I actually, this question does come up from time to time in the region about whether there's any implications from that discussion on countries in Southeast Asia. I think we've unfortunately lost the minister again at this critical moment. Well, maybe we can follow up with this question after the session. I think actually we're coming to the end of the webinar.
Sorry, here again.
Okay. Yes.
What I was saying is that, of course, the devil is always in the details, and about the detail. Regarding the details, I cannot talk much because it's still being designed. But the idea of a carbon border adjustment tax is crucial for a continent or an economic area that wants to move very fast on its decarbonization efforts. It's the only way for us to be able to maintain our industry. Of course, it has to be properly designed and it has to be compatible with WTO rules. But the idea of a carbon border adjustment is crucial for an economic area such as Europe that wants to move very fast on its decarbonization goals. It's the only way to preserve its competitiveness and industry. But it has to be properly designed and it has to be compatible with the WTO. It's a challenge.
Fair enough. Thank you, Minister. I think that's a fair comment. And I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap up this webinar. So I want to thank all my panelists for joining us for this discussion. And also I want to thank the organizers, SIEW and Singapore, Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore, for hosting the webinar. So Serene, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you very much to His Excellency, speakers and moderator for the insightful discussions. We have come to the end of the SIEW Energy Insights webinar series. Do note that a recording of this session will be made available online. We would also love to hear your thoughts on this webinar, so please complete the feedback form that is displayed on your screen. We also look forward to meeting you at SIEW 2021 this October. Registration is now open with an early bird promotion running till 1st October. Please scan the QR code on the screen for more details. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for joining us today and have a great evening ahead.